Hello, I'm Matthew, and I teach you the skilled techniques to do what you want with flowers. What goes with flowers? Parties. So I also teach you the skills of great entertaining, and I always keep a mind for doing all of it in a way that neither breaks budget or spirit, because the greatest party in the world is useless if it has crushed us to put on. With that said, today we are making a great entrance table, and I will tell you all about it shortly. Before I do that, welcome to my house in Kentucky, and happy holidays, however you do or do not celebrate. My idea for an entrance table came both because you may well be giving a party for the holidays. If not for the holidays, you may be giving a party at some time in the future. And this is a bit of a continuation on my idea that I gave you earlier this season about a tablescape alternative is the name of the film on YouTube. And on Substack, I think I called the companion article A Designer's Guide to Decorating Great Parties, something like that. You can find me in both places as well as Instagram at @mathertonbaber. And I will link those bits of content in the description for this film too. Anyway, in the Substack article, I talked about the value of an entrance table and how an entrance table done strategically with precision sets your guests' tone and expectations for everything that follows in the party. It has the additional advantage that in many venues, guests enter and exit the same way. So a great entrance table is seen again as your guests leave the venue, and it bookends your event with this marvelous impression, of course, when you've done it correctly. So have a look at the article for more details on all of that. I want to pull from the YouTube film a quote I gave you by Italo Calvino, and that is that nothing is more complex than simplicity, and perfection is the ultimate outcome of subtraction. So I want to carry on with this idea that we are not trying to create an entrance table that has things stacked on it or is heavy laden with surplus. We want to be focused and disciplined about what we choose. I want to additionally introduce the idea that is really the ethos of the great Escriba chocolatier and pastry shop in Barcelona. And that is, and has been for generations, decades, that they always strive to excite and surprise with unforgettable, irrepeatable moments and experiences. That is a fantastic rule of design, and it is a fantastic rule of giving parties. You want to surprise your guests, you want to engage them, and you want to entice them in. There is no better way to do it than an entrance table because it sets the tone. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's think about attending a concert. If you drive up or walk up on the sidewalk, however you approach, if you approach a barn, the expectation of what type of music you will hear is likely different than if you approach a concert hall, if you approach an opera house, or if you approach a stadium. All the intangible clues, and some tangible clues, tell us more or less what to expect. And the same is true of an entrance table. You want to tantalize and draw your guests into the venue. I think about great hotels that use the entrance table or an entrance feature to tremendous effect. I remember years ago, I was leaving the Paris Opera, and I walked past the Café de la Paix, and I turned the corner, and through the open entrance door of Le Grand, the hotel, I saw a huge round table with a three-tiered stand, and the stand was in the middle of the table, almost so discreet it disappeared. And each tier was stacked with potted white Phalaenopsis orchids, all at the same height in 3 tiers. And it made an opulent, grand point of arrival that was also spectacular in its simplicity, but you absolutely knew what to expect beyond that table in the quality and the magnificence of that hotel. Similarly, I think of walking off Bourbon Street in New Orleans, and you go from the clanging, noisy, filthy street into the silent marble foyer of the Royal Sonesta Hotel, and you hear trickle, trickle, trickle of water. And you see in just a few steps a round fountain with an ornate riser in the center and a big arrangement of flowers on top. And you see the staff are moving slowly in their pressed uniforms, and it tells you everything you need to know about what is about to happen in that hotel. You can do exactly the same thing, whether you are a professional and you are interested in this kind of skill to work with a higher value clientele, or you simply want to do things beautifully at home. The wonderful thing about skills is they work the same in every context. The techniques never change, the styles do. So, through everything we do today with the entrance table, think about adapting it to your style and your situation. I'm going to give you a few starting points to orient you to what we're doing, and then we're going to cut, and I'm going to actually take you to a table and demonstrate what I mean. But don't stick on my linen being different than yours, or what I put on the table being different than yours. See it through the lens of adapting it to what you have, what you like, what your guests like, how you like to use this type of idea. With that, let me orient you. Where to begin? How do you size your table? Because I'm in America, I'm going to deal in feet and inches. And it's an easy conversion if you are accustomed to other denominations. But what I'm going to suggest on size is 4 feet and inches. And it is really a rule for how to size a chandelier to a room. Why am I telling you about a chandelier? It is not exactly the same for an entrance table, but it is an approximation that will get you close. And then you can use your own judgment. The formula is this. Take the measurement in feet of the length plus the width of the room, and that will give you a number in feet. And instead of feet, just take your pencil and erase feet and put in inches. For example, a room is 10 feet by 10 feet, that's 20 feet, erase the feet, 20 inches. So that would be the approximate diameter of a chandelier that's appropriately sized for that room. And if you think about it, a chandelier placed in the middle is not so different visually than a round table sitting on the floor. Certainly you can have tables custom made, but for entertaining events, temporary tables, you might be using a pop-up table, the kind you would get from a rental or a catering company, and those very often come in even feet dimensions, 24 inches, 36, 48, etc. Don't feel if it's 1 inch off that your entrance table is ruined, but use the rules of design. If the table is slightly visually large, put a darker linen on it that has no shine at all. If you want to make a small table look a little bigger, a lighter linen with shine. You can also use the scale of pattern to your advantage. See, the rules of design, the rules of art, they really, really change the quality and experience of our lives. Another thing to think about size is if, for example, your entrance table is in the arrival room, the entrance room of a huge castle, you can use a very large table. Maybe you need a large table for proportion in the space. And let's say you're only having 1 or 2 dozen guests. It's a lot of space with very few people. So you can afford the big grand table. But what if you are entertaining in a city apartment where with your 50 guests and the furniture, it's already at maximum capacity? Then you do not have room for a large table, because whatever your space, whatever the size of your table, people have to be able to comfortably and safely navigate around it in both directions. In both directions, people very often are coming and going at the same time when you've got any number of guests at an event. So keep that in mind. And also, where do you place the table in your room? It's always important to give guests the opportunity to step into the door and experience the space before they're falling over an entrance table. So look at my article again, Designer's Guide to Decorating Great Parties, because I talk about space and how you use the space, really importantly how you select the space, choosing the right venue that you like as it exists without having to totally redecorate it with additions is extremely important, and I talk about that in the article. But to the same idea, your entrance table should be a great addition, not a complete reimagining of the room. So, do you put your table halfway into the room? Maybe. I would say think of going slightly further back from the entrance door than half. 2/3 back might be too far, because very often you're entering, you're going to encounter and move around the table, and then you've got to exit the room as well. Now, if the room is less of a room and more of a colonnade, or there are many architectural variations that you can account for, you've got to use your judgment. It must be safe, and it must not seem cramped. Certainly pay attention to the rules of the fire marshal. You don't want to create any danger. But I have given you a basic guide to size, where to place the table in the room. I'm going to show you a table linen. I'm going to show you some things that are unseen but make the table linen feel more elegant and give it a visual gravity. And then I'm going to show you what to put on it. I will say again, don't tune out if the style I show you is different than the style you like, because this is an idea that you can adapt to the things you love. Hold that thought, make yourself comfortable, and I will be back with a table to show you how it's done. Hello and welcome to my dining room, where I have pulled the table to one end so I can use it to demonstrate how I build an entrance table. I want to point out a couple of things before we begin. It's important that you see the whole table, but I can't set up the camera so that you can see me dressing the table and the whole table at once. So please be patient, and at the end I will add photos of the whole table so you can see the whole thing put together. Also, this is a 48-inch table. That means it's 48 inches diameter across the top, right at the center. It is 30 inches high, which is relatively standard for a dining table, library table, center table for an entrance hall, anything like that. So it's a good example that I'm pleased to show you for this purpose. But as I mentioned earlier, it might as well be a cater table, kind of a folding legs dining table. If that's what you use, be sure the legs are locked and be sure your table is really stable, that it's not going to rattle apart or collapse when you put something heavy on it later. And with that, let's build the entrance table. Now, we are going to build up several layers. We're not going to put the final linen right on right away. Why? Linens vary a lot in thickness and in heft. And you can have a lovely concept, but if your linen feels chintzy, it could be an extremely extravagant linen, but if it feels chintzy, and if it blows in the wind like it's very light, it will look to your guests like it's cheap. And we don't want that. That undermines all our efforts. So what do we do instead? The first thing we're going to do, and by the way, you can use this same method to dress your dining table. It's what I have used for all of the grand entertaining I've done in my life. It is what I use when I entertain at home still. That's why I've got all the linens for it, so you'll see. But the thing to keep in mind for your first layer is if you have a nice table, like this veneer top table, I want to protect this surface as my first concern. If you have like a plywood table with the metal banding like those rental tables, you're probably not going to damage them, and it's probably less of a concern. But what I'm going to use as my first layer is this very inexpensive kind of, I don't even know what you really call it. It's these linens that are vinyl on one side. This one happens to be textured like linen. That's completely in material. Vinyl is the important part. And on the reverse is a polyester batting that's soft. So I'm going to try to not rattle too loudly, but with the soft side down, this goes on our table first. Why? It goes on our table because if we put, for example, a large floral arrangement in the middle, and there's any condensation on the foot, or someone were to tip it over and spill the water, yes, the linen would get wet, but it would not penetrate and damage our table. That's really important. So this is one that I have cut to fit this table. I use it on this table regularly, and if it's not perfect, it does not matter. It's not going to be seen. The fact that it's white does not matter because it's not going to be seen. But in addition to protecting the table, it also starts to ease the edge. The point of padding your table, which is what this and the next layer do, other than protecting your table, is when you touch the table or when you set something on it, it gives you just a little bit of give that you do not have if you put the linen down on the bare table. And that little bit of extra padding makes all the difference. If it's a dining table, you notice it very subtly when you pick up your flatware, when you set down your drinking glass. And with this, you will notice when we place something on it, there'll be just a tiny little indention, and that is a little hallmark of quality. So this is on, could not be simpler. I'm going to get the next layer. I'll be right back. We are on to the second layer of our entrance table. What I have here is a quilted moving pad, like furniture moving pad. You can see it's got a very reasonable, hefty thickness, and this one is trimmed. You don't want frayed edges, but otherwise, this is another utilitarian layer. You're not going to see it in the finished design. But it's hefty, and you want it to go all the way around, and you want it to go at least over the edge and a few inches more. If it goes a little longer, even better. But the point is not that it necessarily goes all the way to the floor, but if a breeze catches your table, you're going to see it in the first, I don't know, foot below the drop of your tabletop. And this will give that fabric some body behind it. This also is where we get the real cushion for feeling through our top-dressed linen. I'll be right back and show you that linen. All right, I have added the finished linen, so let's talk about it. As you see, it is an elegant chinoiserie type of tapestry. And it is a machine-made tapestry, but of a very high quality. And it is full of interest. A linen with this type of bold print might be an awful lot for a whole party. But to set the tone for an entrance table, it's something to think about. This one is entirely custom made. I will tell you how I had that done. You may or may not have that option, though. If you're going to choose one linen for a whole party to have custom made, the entrance table is the place to do it. And particularly if you are entertaining at home or a venue where you entertain often, it is worth making a linen that you will use time and again. They are worth their weight in gold. They're expensive, but take care of them and they will last for ages. I've used a lot of custom linens over my life, but I've used a lot of rental linens as well. So let's say you're renting a linen. How do you choose one that will perform this function nicely? The first thing you need to do is you need to determine the size of the linen you need. So how do you do that? Well, you measure straight from the floor up to your tabletop, and at the widest part of the diameter, straight across the top, and then from that edge, straight down to the floor on the other side. Now, a good seamstress will know how to account for seam allowances and all of that. You just have to be able to tell them that you've gone straight up to the tabletop. In this case, it's 30 inches, straight across the top, in this case, 48 inches, straight down the other side, 30 inches. So if you're renting a linen, whatever your dimension is the minimum linen size you can use, though I caution you against saying, for example, I need 108 inches. 108 inches when that linen was made may well have shrunk. And if you don't try, not just a linen from the collection, if you don't try the specific linen that you've rented, you don't know whether or not it shrunk. Very often they have. And even if it shrunk an inch or an inch and a half all the way around, you're going to see a margin between the linen and the floor. And this is a style, whether your linen is rented or custom, where you want the linen to go all the way to the floor. So, with the example I gave, 108 inches, it's a standard linen size. If that's what you needed, rent a linen that's larger, substantially larger. And then what do? When you've positioned your linen on top of all of these layers, you can also rent those layers usually, by the way. You don't have to buy all of that out of pocket if it's something you prefer to rent. But you put your linen on, centered on the table, and then all the way around you turn it over, and you give it a brush or tug a little bit of the slack that you've tucked under the drop, just to give it a nice tailored finish straight down to the floor. If you like a little pooling, a little bit of surplus fabric ballooned at the bottom, that's a stylistic choice that you can make. I like a tailored finished look, but I can't tell you what you like. So, this linen, as I said, I had made, and it is very representative of custom linens generally. I took the yardage that I bought of this tapestry, this sort of chinoiserie tapestry. And as you see here, I had it lined. The lining protects the back of the fabric. It also adds an additional heft so that when it hangs over the edge of your table, it will hang with a gravity that feels expensive and very high quality. Then, on top of it, I added, I'm sorry it's upside down, but this is the best I can show you on the table. On top of it, I had top stitch. It's how they do it. This wonderful bullion fringe. And I chose the colors of the fringe from the linen and from the rug of the room where I often use this linen. This type of bullion fringe is beautiful. It is harder to get than it used to be, but there are some people still doing it well, and some companies still making it, I mean. And the thing to think about, if you put it on a custom linen, an entrance table is a great place to do it. It is expensive. And it also stretches your linen slightly. How much depends entirely on the weight of your fringe, but it is heavy. When it is of this gauge, this thickness per fringe, per individual strand of fringe, and in the volume it takes to go around a table, it will stretch your linen. How much? It's really no one can say. So a seamstress may ask you if you want them to estimate the stretch and make your linen that much smaller, or if you prefer to use the linen for a while and then bring it back and they will trim the excess and take off the fringe, trim the excess, put the fringe back on so that it fits your table perfectly after all the stretching is done. That's what I always prefer. Certainly if you're using the linen for a party, you have it made just for an occasion, it is not going to stretch before your party. So that's not a concern. I just mention that because if you're having this made, that's the right thing to do. You're going to spend some money, so you want to get your good out of it. What else? I don't know if you can see here, but I will certainly put pictures at the end of the film of how this very nicely eases the fabric over the edge of the table. It falls with a beautiful heft. It also gives a nice undulating effect to the drape between the tabletop and the floor. And now we come to another decision. In general sort of professional entertaining scenarios, now you would put a centerpiece of some kind, a big arrangement, a large arrangement. We'll talk about that in a moment. You'd put it right on the table, right on the linen. Okay, fine. However, because this is a table that I assemble in this way, often I have a piece of custom cut glass with a beveled edge. And I'm going to put that on because it will protect my linen. So let me get the tabletop and I will show you what effect that gives. Now, when would you use it and when would you not? You would very often make an entrance table like this, for example, at the entrance of a wedding, and around your center arrangement of flowers, maybe topiary of ivy, whatever you're using. Around that, maybe you would lay your place cards so everyone can find their name and see what table they'll be seated at. If you need to put those place cards in a way that stands, very often they're either a tent or they are in an envelope, and the stiff paper of the envelope has a flap that will be lifted to make them stand. And it looks very pretty all the way around, but you would have trouble standing them on glass. So in that case, skip the glass. Just let the texture of the fabric work to your advantage. But the glass is also an extremely polished look. It is not something you will easily be able to rent. But I'll be back and I'll show you the glass. And we're back with glass. You can see what a polished look it gives. I hope you can see it well on camera. The consideration I will propose for you now is that if you are going to put a large arrangement, potted plant, anything like that here, get yourself some felt. This is not particularly one for this linen, but get yourself some felt, yardage, and a heavy weight that is close to a color of linen where it will be discreet. It won't be particularly noticed. And then take the foot of your vessel, your container for your arrangement. Trace on the back of your felt, and then cut slightly larger than the base, all the way around with pinking shears. You probably can't see that I've done that here, but I have. And then put that in the middle of your table, and when you put your centerpiece on, you can put it here. First of all, if the bottom of the foot is a little rough, it will not scratch your glass. Also, when you set it down, if it's glass, if it's crystal, you will not crash glass on glass for a chip or a break. These are all the little details that go into really luxurious entertaining. You don't get this from the bargain basement people, but every little detail counts. It all adds up to value. And if you're a professional, that value means a lot to your clients. If you're doing this nicely at home, maybe it means a lot to you and your loved ones. But I also believe that those of us that know how to entertain in this way have a responsibility to do it. Maybe not often, but sometimes. Because if we don't do it, who will? The whole world does not just merely amount to what sells and what's profitable. There is cultural knowledge that we must pass to future generations or it will be gone. Now I'll get off my soapbox about it, but I believe in it and I hope it means something to you as well. I know to a lot of you it does because you write to me and tell me, and I thank you. So we need to put a centerpiece on here. Having the grandest dress table in the world does us no good for our entrance if we leave it blank. So I went to a party a couple of years ago and they had someone on the entrance table actually hanging over it from a big silk scarf, and she was pouring champagne in your glass as you went past. That is probably the most dramatic version you'll ever see. Not what I'm proposing you do in your reception hall at home. But how do you decide what to put on? Well, this is making the statement. This is introducing the ideas and the quality of the entertaining that will follow. So, I can't tell you what your event will be like, what your party will be like. Only you can make that determination. But if your look is rather gardeny, use a gardeny container with either live potted plants or flowers. If it's more formal, make it more formal. If it's more casual, make it more casual. The thing that you don't want is you don't want it to be so sprawling that people can't pass around the table without getting caught or feeling they have to swat it away. That's not elegant. So the general rule I would advise is, even with branches that extend or small leaves, any kind of detail that reaches out, keep it within about the middle 2/3 of your table diameter. And if you have something that you can basically see through, like the tips of branches, maybe that can go up a bit higher, but generally aim for width and height that when you stand back and squint, basically make a visual square. I'm not saying your arrangement has to be a square. I'm saying the proportion, the width to height ratio, looks the most finished and professional when it is approximately equal. I hope that's helpful. People sometimes say, well, does that mean the flowers or the flowers and the container? And it means both together, the flowers and the container, about a square. Visually, you want 1/3 or 1/2 of that height to be container, and generally, particularly when you've raised an arrangement up like this, say 30 inches high, what you want is about equal container and flowers height. You could go, as I said, a bit higher, but you have to be careful because you don't want to catch someone on the periphery. Okay, before I bring in a centerpiece, what could you be wondering? You might wonder, what if you have a much smaller table? Simply shrink the whole design to fit the scale of the table and the space. If you don't have room for an entrance table, but you still want that grand effect, what could you do? Well, if you're lucky and you're in some kind of venue, maybe you're in a house, for example, with a curved or sweeping staircase that has a landing or enough of a curve in it where instead of in the center of the room or slightly back of center, you can move your entrance table into the curve of the stairs, that's a very good thing to do. It can be very successful if you have a great big long grand piano, which old houses often have under a big staircase. You can pull the piano out just slightly and either drape the piano. Be careful, maybe you just use an old shawl, something interesting. You don't use a table linen in that case. Just drape the piano and put something interesting there, and visually it's experienced the same as an entrance table. You could also push the piano all the way back and try to move a small table for an entrance table into the curve of the piano. You've got to just work with the space and work with what you have. Have I ever used a plinth? A sturdy plinth that is not likely to tip over in lieu of an entrance table? Yes, I have, but it is operative, absolutely key, that if you do that, your arrangement, your plant, whatever goes on top, is incredibly stable, and even if it's bumped, is not going to break or fall. I was once helping a florist friend at Meridian House in Washington, D.C., a great big mansion with a double staircase in the entrance hall, and then a few steps down, you walked under the staircase to other rooms. And in those steps down on the landing, this florist did exactly what I said, a plinth, big arrangement in an urn, and in fact someone had had several cocktails and bumped the arrangement, and the urn snapped at the neck. And I saw it happen and had to put it back together convincingly for the remainder of the party. Those are not the kinds of experiences we want from this type of effect, so be very careful. It's better safe than sorry. If you have any concern, don't do the precarious design. Okay, so we've talked about the scale of something to put on top of our table. We've dressed it beautifully. I will be right back with something to show you. Well, I'm back, and as you see, I brought a friend. This is the maximum size that you would go. However, I want to show you that when you garden, when you grow some things for yourself, you have this sort of thing at your disposal. Now, as I said, this is about the maximum size, but I love that in these glossy leaves, I forget exactly which one, this is some form of date palm, Through these glossy leaves, the sun can filter, and as you approach this as an entrance table and you look beyond it, clearly you not have just a wall there. This would open to a grand hall or through a doorway, and you can see the twinkling of light through these fronds, just enough to beckon you past. Also, it has this border that's sort of barely hanging on from the summer of Mandevilla, but I think that's really quite charming. It tells us about this place. So would I use this for the fanciest of the fancy place? I would use something very similar. Maybe in addition to, or instead of the Mandevilla, I would have planted some trailing ivy, maybe even variegated. That might have been awfully lush and opulent feeling. And as you see, I could run my fingers through and fluff this a bit more. There are some fronds I could trim that have singed edges from the last days of summer. But that's not only the story of this plant, it's the story of this place. I'm the world's most reluctant gardener. Here in Kentucky, the summers are incredibly hot and humid, which means I'm growing more and more of this tropical type of plant as the climate warms. But anytime you can compose a pot like this once and take care of it, nurture it, and use it time and again, even if you've got a little bit of money in the planter and in the plants, and yes, it takes some time to water it and so on, the value is that you use it over and over and over again. Be careful, of course, if you put this in an entrance hall that's dark, let's say in your home, and you have your party, don't forget it there, because if your plant needs a lot of light, it's going to be extremely unhappy in that dark hall. But just as an example of how to decorate the table and create an entrance, I think this is a good stand-in for what might be a huge bouquet. Speaking of, I should say huge arrangement. Arrangements and bouquets are different, but I often use opulent, big hand-tied bouquets, big ones, 200 stems, on an entrance table with some trailing vines and such, because a hand-tied bouquet is lower than this, so you see it slightly from above, and that's really the best way to view that type of design. So that's another way to excite your guests. I have a few closing thoughts, but I want you to just have another look at this before I take it away. The Mandevilla has buds, it has blooms, it certainly had more in the summer, but seeing that we have something like this, even in winter, that is not fresh cut, which is either going to be thrown out or into compost soon enough, and it is not something that's plastic that's been manufactured and will end up in landfill. The fact that we have something that we enjoyed all summer long, and it reminds us to look ahead to next summer, I think this is an awfully exciting way to dress your table, and this could be, as I said, with small alterations, be more formal or more casual. So I hope you find it an illustrative example, and boy, if there's one thing I find glamorous and elegant, it is seeing beautiful palm fronds indoors. I wish you could see it in comparison to the crystal chandelier, because that relationship with the sconce glow in the back and this lovely linen is really nice, but none of it would read as successfully as it does here, assembled, without dressing the linen on the table the way we did to make this entrance table. I hope you find that helpful. Well, that's pretty much a wrap, not just on this film, but on my season. What can I tell you? I forgot to tell you about the felt liner that we made. Another good thing about it is plants, flower arrangements, all of it inevitably have a public side, a front-facing side that you want to highlight. And having that pad on the glass allows you to spin it very easily, even if the arrangement is heavy. Of course, without scratching your table and without lifting your arrangement. I will say, if you're using a glass top, be absolutely sure it is completely well supported underneath by a flat tabletop, and be sure that the weight of what you put on it will not break the tabletop. This is thick. This is half-inch glass, and it is tempered. And if you're worried that tempered glass traditionally has a slight gray cast to it, just a little bit of a green look. Um, my goodness, it's expensive, but you can now get tempered glass that is completely clear, just like standard glass. If it's worth that cost to you, have at it. It's available. What else have I forgotten to tell you? Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. Thank you for watching this season. We have learned and grown together. I'm excited about next season. I've got a lot of ideas. I'm already planning and scheduling things out. And I also have a lot of things I want to learn before I leap into next season. The thing that excites me about the seasons is what I learn while I make them for you. And I hope that I'm helping you learn and feel excited about learning too. I'm still around on my off season. My roses, of course, quiet down that I grow, and I don't produce as much content, but my website is live, my online classes remain available to download on demand, and you never know when I might release something unexpectedly. So, happy holidays, happy New Year. I'll see you soon.